Hello guys, how's it going? Screezilla here, I hope you're all well. So, bit of rare good news from me today. Well, not from me, but from War Thunder. War Thunder news. Naval battles, they have listened to us. Hallelujah, praise whatever god you listen to. Or if you don't, praise something else if you're an atheist. We're getting destroyers. So if you've not seen in the news, War Thunder announced today that we're getting the Tribal class destroyer, which is interesting because the Tribal class is one of the heavier destroyers out there. Now, they're using the pre-war modifications of the ship, which leads me to believe that there'll be a similar system to, say, World of Warships. I'm hoping, where you'll be able to change the ship with modifications. Like how we can change the tanks and things in ground warfare. However, with upgrades with vehicles at the moment, you only sort of upgrade certain armaments. With planes, you do have gun upgrades. With ships, there's going to be different upgrades. You're going to be able to upgrade hulls and things like that because there are variants there. But also, there's different gun layouts. So, let's first of all talk about the Trident. Did I say Trident? Tribal. Sorry, Tribal class. The Tribal class was the workhorse. It was basically the flagship destroyer of the fleet. Made in 1936. It was one of the most modern destroyers. Now, the Royal Navy believed that destroyers were going to be sort of on their own, working ships, not having to worry so much about aircraft, things like that. They were proved horribly wrong, and this is why modifications happened. So let's talk about the ship a little bit more in detail. So, destroyers had sort of basically been a bit stagnant in the Royal Navy. The D-39 class, like HMS Amazon, things like that, were your basic destroyers, which small ships basically, very small independent ships. If you look at the destroyers from the 1920s and then to the 1940s and 1930s, you see how much of a change there was. They really went up in size. It's almost like changing a gunboat to a battleship. They're quite a bit different, and this ship is big. When you compare it to things like the gunboats that we have now. So, first of all, let's talk about the crew level. Well, you had about 190... I think it was 190? Yeah. So 190 crew on the standard vessel. It's a lot of crew. You're not going to have your crew taken out pretty quickly. Now, there was actually a few more on the leaders, so the main ships, the flotilla leaders, which had 220 crew members, 219 crew members. Length, 377 feet. Beam, 36 feet. And depth, 11 feet. So beam is width, basically. So right here, we're just coming up on some German destroyers that are in the game at the moment. And these probably are 1936 A-class destroyers from the look of them. It's a bit hard to see, but I'd say they're probably an A-class because, well, they look like them, basically. With the 3 turrets at the back, the one at the front, the 2 smokestacks, things like that. And we'll get on to that in a minute. So, when they designed these, they thought, well, we're not going to have to worry about aircraft too much. We're going to be sort of more attacking boats and blah, blah, blah. So, although they had a good anti-aircraft armament on them, they didn't have the greatest. And this proved to be an undoing because they were really buggered by German dive bombers, basically. So, let's talk about some of the armaments. So, in-game, we're going to be getting the base version, which was... which was the sort of one that was drawn up before they went into action, basically. So the first ship, the design, basically, which had 8 120mm guns in 4 turrets. It had twin guns, 2 forward, 2 stern. It had quadruple 40mm pom-poms on it, and 2 quadruple mounted large caliber machine guns. We're going to get 50 caliber machine guns with this. Torpedoes, it had a single quadruple tube. Hopefully we will get some rearming for the torpedoes, because they did carry more than one burst of torpedoes on these ships. Hopefully. And they also had a big capability of depth charges. They carried 20 depth charges on board. And it had a very good submarine detecting system. Now, this is from War Thunder's own little write-up. The reduced torpedo armament was not mirrored in the vessel's anti-submarine capabilities. In addition to anti-submarine sonar, all Tribal-class destroyers carried 20 depth charges that could be dropped from special rack or thrown from mine launchers. So, what does this mean? Well, if you get your hopes up, it means you could get, you could be getting submarines in the game. I doubt it, but hey, we've got our hopes up. 16 of his destroyers were lost during the war. Not 16, 13 destroyers. There was 23 in total. 6 were lost through air raids, 5 through torpedo, 1 from a shore gun, and 1 with a collision from the battleship King George V. In heavy weather, the ship collided with it. Now, the Tribal-class destroyer is kind of an interesting ship to get in War Thunder. Why, I hear you asking? You know, why is this an interesting ship to get? Well, mainly because Tribal classes were quite high-tech. Now, here we have a Farragut destroyer in World of Warships. So, this is the USS Farragut. Similar build period. So, similar guns, similar layout to what you'll be getting with the Nicholas. Sorry, the Tribal class destroyer. Except, you know, it has the quadruple launchers, 2 quadruple launchers here. It has less anti-aircraft capability, though. And that's the thing I wanted to say, is, well, the Tribal class had a very special anti-aircraft system on it. So, it had the pom-pom guns fitted to it, but when it went to war, it actually had one of its main guns replaced with a 2-pounder Orkillian AA gun, which is a 20mm. Well, not A. It had 4 of these 20mm Orkillian AA guns on it. But it also had the FKC computer on it, the fuse-keeping clock. Now, the fuse-keeping clock was an analog computer, and it was used on all British destroyers and pretty much every British ship afterwards. It was revolutionary at the time. So if we just say go to the British... We'll need to go to the Fiji, I think. Might be on Leander. Just going to mutter to myself for a moment. But what this was a battery of radar, this section here. And this basically, let me bring up my notes on this. This basically meant that the ship could calculate aircraft a lot easier. So it basically, any plane flying up to about 280 miles per hour, I think it was, it would work out the angle at which the guns would fire and also the height. So there was no manual measurements involved, which meant that those big guns, the let's have a look. So these here, these big 20mm guns here, which are your Achillean 20mm, and this is the dual-mounted version. They would basically be told where the plane was and almost have automatic guidance, along with your big pom-poms, which are these, your 40mm pom-pom guns. So these would be basically automatically targeted on the enemy air fleet. So the guns would fire and also hit with flak and the likes with ease. So it really made a difference. Now you may be thinking, well, okay, that's cool. What does it mean in War Thunder? Well, it could mean that we get aiming reticles for AAA fire, because, well, it's got a radar on it. It should make it easier. It could also mean that, say, the AA is taken over by the AI, again, which would be perfectly fine. And these things are going to be really hard to hit with a plane, because those AA are brutal. Not only do they fire flak, but they fire high velocity, armor piercing, things like that. So you're really going to have trouble. Now, the other thing that these ships did carry were they did have barrage balloons. Now, they generally only carried one on destroyers, and it wasn't used that often, in all honesty. It was only used in moorings and stuff like that. But as we get to larger ships, we could be looking at something like that as well, and that would be a cool little system to have barrage balloons up. We would only be able to use them at low speeds, but it might put people off coming in for suicide runs, or, you know, coming in really close to the ship with a plane. So that could be something to help with the big problem, which is basically planes. So we now know we're getting destroyers. So what we're going to do is we're going to use World of Warships here as a little thing to look at what other destroyers we might be getting. Now, it looks like they're going to be going from around about 1930 onwards for destroyers. So more advanced destroyers. So we're going to get things, if you're a regular player of World of Warships, like the Farragut, like the Man, things like that. The slightly larger, more manoeuvrable things. Now, is the tribal class the starting destroyer? If so, that's probably going to be your top tier ship. But if they're adding destroyers, they need to add more than just one destroyer. They need to add a sort of line of it. Now, this also is good news for Japan, because Japan had some amazing destroyers in the war. Things like the Wakatake, butchering pronunciations here, but you're basically going to get some very interesting destroyer variants. The Misuki, for instance, very much focused on torpedoes, but there was also things like the Azuki here, Akazuki, which was focused on basically being a gunboat. Now, of course, it still had torpedoes on it, but only a single tube, a single quad tube on it. But mainly it was the guns. And yeah, they only had 100mm guns, but they were very accurate guns, and they were very good guns. It also had pretty good AAA defense as well. As you can see, AAA, you've got 6. So you've got 12 25mm, 3 25mm, and 8. Well, the 800mm can be used as AAA guns as well, but I don't think War Thunder will be. We won't be using that sort of feature in War Thunder, but you will be getting interesting things like that. The other thing is the German destroyers. Now, luckily, World of Warships has got them now, so we'd be looking at things like the probably the T-22. So things like the T-22 onwards. Now the German destroyers are going to be a bit different because, well, they tended to have the single guns. Now, as I did mention before, there'll be the Type 1936 A-class destroyer as well, which I don't know if is actually in World of Warships. I don't think it is, but it's basically a similar layout to a similar layout to the Leber's Mass in the gun layout, but it had the double guns on it. But it, you've got big guns on these things. Well, relatively big, 128mm, things like that. Very speedy, the German destroyers, and well, very big as well. Germany sort of the Type 1936A, which I showed you in the video, which is pretty much just the stock standard sort of destroyer you get in the game, really. But if it is that ship, it's more of a light cruiser than a destroyer, because it was relatively heavily armoured. So it will be interesting to see that. The other thing is, if we do get light cruisers as well, and light cruisers, things like the Hermelin here, these are very light cruisers. They're more sort of escort cruisers. Relatively big guns. Not many. Relatively good AAA defense. Just bit more armoured, basically. So you got the 23mm and 35mm armour on these things, whereas with destroyers you only have about, I think it's about 20mm of armour on most of those things. But things like the Black Swan would work as well. Again, you look at this and you think, well, that's a destroyer. Now, it's a light cruiser, and although it has less guns than the destroyer, they're a bit more accurate, but it has the armour. And it has sort of size advantage, things like that. It's going to be tricky to introduce things like light destroyers, I think, because, well, in all honesty, the Black Swan sort of light cruisers would be destroyed by the destroyers. You'll need to go to sort of slightly heavier destroyers to actually really get a benefit. Sorry, I keep saying destroyers, cruisers. So things like the probably the Danae would be your best light cruiser to sort of add in a game. It's a pretty decent sized cruiser. It's much bigger than the destroyers. It still has torpedoes on it, but it has these beautiful big 152mm guns. along with decent armour around the important parts. So almost 76mm of armour around it, which will really make a difference. The other thing is, do they introduce torpedo physics? So a lot of ships have torpedo belts. This one doesn't. But if we look at some heavier ships, now I'm using World of Warships here just because it's probably the easiest system to show this kind of thing on. Just going to go for the Colorado because that's going to have it sort of for sure. So you have torpedo bulges, and a lot of ships ended up having these, which were just to really deflect torpedo hits. So it was armour over the citadel area, the important bits, which just helped deflect torpedoes and lessen the damage, basically. So that's something that could also be added. But as I said, this is really good news. We won't go on to, we've got to get the destroyers tested before we can go anywhere else. But we finally got ships into War Thunder, and that's really good news. Okay, guys, I will catch you again soon. When I get some more news, I'll update you as well. And I look forward to testing these things. Alright, guys, see you later. Bye-bye.